Hello and welcome to the Salty Scout Food and Travel Podcast. I'm Jane and I live, travel and cook aboard a 45-foot sailboat named Scout with my husband James. I'm looking forward to sharing the delicious food and drink experiences that make each sailing destination unique. Since setting sail from the US East Coast in 2022, I've been on a culinary adventure with a loose plan and a passion to explore and taste my way through the world's local cuisines. Whether you're an avid adventurer, fellow sailor, armchair traveller or food enthusiast, join me on this journey as I discover local foods, drinks, recipes, cooking techniques and restaurants as diverse as the places we visit. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Salty Scout. This is episode 7 and I'm actually recording this while on Scout. We are actually sailing Scout right now. And I'd like to introduce James. He's with me today on this particular podcast. Do you want to say
hello, hello. Excuse the creaking boat.
We are on our Pacific crossing right now between Galapagos and French Polynesia. We're hoping it to be like a 25 or so day passage. We are on day 16 now, so certainly over halfway. Have you got any thoughts on the passage so far, James?
It's been going pretty well. Lighter winds than we expected for the first half, 2/3 I would say, but it's starting to pick up now and we've got some good current behind us, so we're rattling along and hope to get there in the next 10 days or so.
Yeah, I hope so. But just to rewind for a second, my previous episode was after we transited the Panama Canal and we were in the Pacific side of Panama, and I think we were cruising the Las Perlas Archipelago Islands, a really beautiful area. And it was prior to us doing a passage from Panama to the Galapagos. That was a 7-day passage and that was quite an adventure for us, and it was also a good base to make final preparations for what would most likely be the furthest passage in terms of mileage for us, and we're expecting for this particular passage to be about 3,300 nautical miles. So this passage did require some preparation and planning in many respects, including the provisioning of food for what could be a 25-day passage for 2 people, myself and James. And that is going to be the discussion point for today's podcast. So we're going to be talking about food provisioning for a Pacific passage crossing. Going back to a passage I did in 2019 when I crossed the Atlantic, one thing I learned with that particular passage is that planning is the key for food provisioning. So doing as much food preparation as you can beforehand so that there's as little cooking as possible while you're on board, because you want to avoid struggling with pots and pans while the boat is heeling. So in today's podcast, I thought we could talk about a typical day of dining while at sea, some suggested pre-prepared frozen meals. I'd like to talk about some fresh produce as well, actually, you know, the types of fruit and vegetables on a passage. And other fresh produce as well that needs to be refrigerated. I'd like to talk about some non-perishable stored items as well, which are always very useful to have. And not only that, but also some meals that can be prepared while on a passage, which are reasonably straightforward to do and don't involve a lot of galley cooking time. And also I want to mention the few types of galley equipment that I use on Scout. And also I want to talk a bit about fishing as well while on a passage. So the first thing I want to talk about is a typical day of dining while on a passage. And this is, you know, the 2 of us, so James and myself, we are the only people on Scout, so we have to work around the watch system. So James, what do you want to say about that?
Okay, so the watch system is basically 4 hours on, 4 hours off. We alternate. In reality, It's not quite like that. We tend to stretch or shrink the lengths of the watches according to the conditions and the sail changes that we need to make, and
especially during the day
and around the meals. But overnight we do 4 hours on, 4 hours off. The other person can sleep. But as a result, many of the meals that we have are made as we need them. Each of us just grabbing what we need from the kitchen. So breakfast is kind of a help yourself. Snacks during the day are pretty informal and as and when needed. And we really only have one planned larger meal in the afternoon when we sort of sit down together and actually get a chance to eat a hot meal. So the rest of the day it's leftovers, crackers, ham, cheese, cereal and toast if we're lucky enough to have some fresh bread in the morning. But I think that's the general gist, just being flexible around the watch system that we need to keep going, because obviously the boat needs to be attended to every minute of the day by at least one of us.
Yeah, that's true. And I will say that I generally manage the provisioning while on a passage. Otherwise, when we're not on a passage, when we're coastal cruising, we share the day-to-day provisioning and the job of cooking. We alternate each day.
So actually going on passage is good for me because I get to do a lot less work in the galley than I normally do.
Yeah. That's so true. All right, so I wanted to talk about the pre-prepared frozen meals. I try to choose like tasty dishes that can be frozen in vacuum-packed or Ziploc bags, and that have got all the the necessary dietary requirements with vegetables and protein. I add the carbs later, such as the rice or the pasta. They're typically one-pot meals and I use my pressure cooker. That is definitely my go-to because it reduces cooking time and therefore the power usage because we have an electric or induction stove. I do start to build up these frozen meals in these bags a few weeks before the passage actually starts, so where it's not too much of a chore for cooking and preparing beforehand. And typical meals would include things like chicken curry, coconut curried pork, beef casserole, lentil curry, ground beef and lentil dish, and these all with various different veggies and flavours. I also do pulled pork and shredded chicken, and these all can be added to freshly cooked pasta on the day that we decide to defrost them.
The other advantage of a one-pot meal and the fact that these are all pre-prepared means that the dishwashing that we have to do both during preparation and during the passage itself is minimized, so we don't want to have to clean endless pots and pans.
That's no fun,
normally
is it?
It's just a bowl that we can microwave and keep things quick and simple.
Yeah, that's definitely a pro to preparing beforehand. All right, and the next thing I want to talk about is fresh produce, so the fruit and vegetables. They're usually bought the day before we start on the passage just to ensure the freshness. Typically, they don't last any more than 2 weeks, except for a few items, which I'll talk about in a moment. What we can get will depend on local availability. So in the Galapagos, we bought whatever was available there. And the fruit shelf life will partly depend on where it's stored, whether it's in a fridge, in the galley, where it's going to be hotter generally, or outside in the fruit hammock, which hangs above the transom. Bananas are generally the items that we put in the fruit hammock, but of course they don't last very long. They tend to ripen very quickly, and so I end up making, say, for example, banana bread with any mushy ones that are left over.
Banana bread is good.
Yeah, is that a big thumbs up for the banana bread? Cool. Okay. We also have citrus fruits such as oranges, which are very useful and they tend to last a while, and also apples as well. I like grapes because I like to snack on them, but they never last very long.
And need to make sure we don't get scurvy.
Yes, absolutely. Oh my gosh, yeah. And veggies tend to last longer, especially if they've been cling wrapped. So there's a bit of a tip. The god of the passage, veggie, is the cabbage and carrots too. But the cabbage is great because it really does last the longest. And I generally use it for making coleslaw with carrot. That's an obvious one. But you can also add it to pasta, cabbage steaks, etc. So it's very versatile. Tomatoes also very good, especially if they're slightly underripe when you buy them, and because you can eat them raw or cooked, and they generally last 2 or so weeks in the fridge. I don't bother with onions because they're very antisocial and they give off this gas causing the other fruit and veg to soften more quickly. So I do all my onion frying within the pre-prepared frozen meals beforehand. I also have a supply of potatoes, just a thing that I do. Oh, excuse that. That's the beeping of the bread maker. I'm making some bread right now. So I do have a supply of potatoes, where I make roast potatoes, for example, in the event that we're motoring, and so because we have an electric oven, I make the most of the power that way. And of course, fresh eggs as well. So where I make hard-boiled egg sandwiches, or omelettes, pancakes, or even egg fried rice. Before we continue, I'd like to bring in Chrissy, who is on a boat called Sailing Vessel Far Out. And Far Out is actually our buddy boat for this particular passage from the Galapagos to French Polynesia. I've asked Chrissy if she can provide an update on their fresh produce situation mid-passage, and also to give a tip on the various ways in which they can preserve their food.
Hello, my name is Chrissy, and thanks for having me on your podcast, Jane. Let me briefly introduce myself first. My husband, Chris, and I have lived on board our catamaran named Far Out for the past 4 years. For this trip from Panama to Marquesas via Galapagos, we have an extra crew member to help us on this very long passage. So where are we? We're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We left Galapagos 15 days ago with Scout, and have another 10 or more days to reach Marquesas. We are about 1,200 nautical miles away from Marquesas. I'm very much enjoying buddy boating with Scout. It's nice to have someone to share this experience with. We have eaten vegetables every day on this trip and have finished the spinach, chard, long beans, broccoli, cauliflower, aubergines, pineapples, and oranges. And now we're down to 1 orange, 6 green tomatoes that are now ripe and ready to eat, 2 avocados, some carrots, lots of potatoes, bunch of capsicums, onions, cabbages, all the long life vegetable stuff. We've heard obtaining eggs in French Polynesia is rather difficult, so we purchased enough eggs for this trip, as well as some to sustain us while we're in French Polynesia. We purchased 96 eggs and have eaten 24 so far. That leaves us 60. I have also frozen some, scrambled them. Sorry, they're raw, scrambled, and put in the freezer in Ziploc bags. But the trouble is they take up a lot of precious freezer space. Now, a salty sailor and an egg farmer recommended coating the eggshells in Vaseline. They say that it should stay fresh for 2 to 3 months stored in room temperature. So that's what we've done this trip. And so far, they're still pretty good, but time will tell. What's worth noting is that we still have fresh curly lettuce, parsley, and coriander after 2 weeks. The secret's just to keep them wrapped in a thin wet towel or cotton cloth and store them in the fridge. It does a wonderful job of keeping all the greens fresh for up to 3 to 4 weeks or longer, depending on the freshness of the produce to start with and your fridge temperature. The towel will eventually dry out in the fridge and needs to be put under the tap to moisten and then wring out the excess water.
Thank you, Chrissy, for that. It was very useful. I would be really interested to know how the Vaseline eggs works out. The next time we'll see Chrissy and the rest of Far Out will be probably in a Polynesian restaurant, I hope, where we can toast to our passage and indulge in someone else's cooking for a change. The next thing I want to talk about is the other fresh produce which needs to be refrigerated, and that's going to be things like cheese. So hard cheese can actually be frozen, as can butter. We like to have a lot of prosciutto and salami and various hams. That's always good to have, as a snack, and eggs as well.
I should point out we have quite a large freezer to fit all of these pre-prepared meals in, as well as the cheeses and the meats and so forth. Those are important to keep cold for as long as possible to preserve them.
Yeah.
Our freezer unfortunately opens to the side, and so when we're on some points of sail, we find that the weight of the drawer tends to sometimes break the seal. So very careful to keep the freezer door closed so that it doesn't let stuff defrost as we're going along. But that's an important part of our setup here, I think, being able to keep these pre-prepared meals cold. And I will say it's also quite a drain on the boat's electrical systems, because the freezer and the fridge do require quite a lot of energy, especially in these tropical climates. So we do need to keep an eye on that, and again make sure that the solar and the hydro generator and the other sources of power that we have on the boat are keeping up with the needs of our food preservation requirements.
So now I want to talk about some non-perishable stored items, the sort of items that can last for many months. Don't necessarily need to be bought just days before the passage, but always making sure that we have them available. So carbohydrates, obviously, that's an important one, and we carry a bulk amount of those. So rice, pasta, noodles, flour for the bread making we've got on the go right now. We're making a loaf of bread, and also granola for breakfast. We also have various canned foods, notably soups, baked beans, garbanzo beans that are good for making hummus. Evaporated milk I use for making yogurt. Tin tuna as well, just in case we're not getting lucky with the old fishing line. And canned tomato sauce for pastas and pizza. We also have snacks as well, so lots of nuts, dried fruits, crackers and rice cakes, cookies, and obviously chocolate. We don't go anywhere without chocolate. These other items as well, like coffee, dried milk, carton milk, tahini for the hummus, teas, water, peanut butter, jams, etc. Like I said before, I also wanted to talk about some of the dishes that I do prepare while I'm on the passage, where they're not going to be consuming too much of my time, or I'm struggling while the boat's healing, etc. But I don't mind making homemade yogurt, which does involve heating up milk, but it doesn't take too long. I make homemade hummus, where there's no cooking involved in that, it's just blending, which is great. We do treat ourselves to homemade pizza, don't we, James? Every
Friday night is pizza night.
It is. It's always something to look forward to. Obviously, I boiled pasta, and for the rice, I do actually microwave it. I've got this special container that you put in a microwave for cooking rice. And then if I have the space in the freezer, I will freeze the rice in bags. Obviously, I make the homemade bread. That's for sandwiches and toast. Also, we make pancakes and omelettes. I make those to use up the eggs. All right, so now I want to talk about galley equipment. And there are some various items that I would recommend. First and foremost, obviously, the pressure cooker. That is essential. Like I said before, it's a really good way to cook and tenderize meat in a shorter space of time and using less fuel. Also, the mini bread maker. That's a relatively new addition to the Scout galley, and we love it. It is great having fresh bread, especially now. We haven't seen land for over 2 weeks, and so the idea of baking bread is just like an amazing opportunity to indulge. And the smell of the bread as well is just great. I love it. We also have a small USB charged handheld food blender, which is really good for, whenever we need to whisk or blend, like for example the hummus. And yes, the yogurt maker jar and incubator, very useful. We've had that now for the last 2.5 years we've been on Scout. And finally, we're going to talk about catching fish while on a passage, and I'm going to hand over to James.
Well, this is one of the things that we sometimes are able to eat when we're not on a passage, because we can obviously fish from the boat anytime, and spearfishing is something that we can often use to catch smaller fish. But when we're on a large passage like this, we have a unique opportunity to hang the fishing lines off the back of the boat and catch something a little bit larger out in the ocean. And so we have both a fishing rod and a bunch of handheld lines that we attach to the back of the boat, and we have a variety of different lures, squids and cedar plugs and various other bits and pieces. And obviously what we're hoping to do is catch something like a tuna or a mahi-mahi or a wahoo.
That would be nice.
We have had mixed success in the Caribbean in particular. We didn't catch very much at all. The Caribbean seems to be a little dry of fish at the moment. But here in the Pacific, we've had a little bit more success on this passage already. We've found 2 or 3 skipjack tuna which we have dutifully brought on board and cut up and preserved. But it's a very unreliable source of protein. We can't always guarantee that we're going to get a fish on a given day. And we've also noticed that it'll depend on the time of day as well, so we might be able to catch something early in the morning or in the evening. We're also more successful when we're passing over ocean ridges and tectonic plates, because that changes the sea bottom and the fish are attracted to changes in depth. But it's basically just something special. If we can pull it off, it's something that we can use to create sushi or a ceviche or carve up into a steak and mix up the protein a little bit to complement all the other prepared meals that we have.
I think the other thing I wanted to mention is that the amount of provisioning really does depend on the length of the passage. So in this case, we thought, with this one could be about 25 days. I always want to make sure I have more than we need for the estimated number of days we're offshore, just in case it does take us longer than we forecasted, which in this case, I think it is going to be a little bit longer, but I don't think we're going to starve. So that's good. So I hope you found this particular podcast about food provisioning for our Pacific Passage interesting, useful, enlightening. Please let me know in the comments, or I do have an Instagram page for Salty Scout. Thank you so much for joining us on board Scout today, and take care.
And I'm just going to finish off by saying thank you, Jane, for feeding me whilst we're on passage.
All right, okay. No problem.